So we're 2023 RSA conference, and we're here with Sam Rubin, the VP of Palo Alto's Unit 42. Thanks, Sam, for taking the time. Unit 42, from what I understand, is a really fascinating part of Palo Alto Networks. You're not on the product team.
That's right. Yeah.
What is Unit 42?
We are Palo Alto Networks threat intelligence and cybersecurity consulting arm.
So that means you're on the street responding to.
Yes, we do a lot of threat intelligence work, helping make our products better from essentially the telemetry that we have from the product portfolio. So putting those back into the products to improve detections and preventions, and then we do a lot of incident response, helping our clients respond to and recover from major cyber events.
So we'll talk about that, but you've been I looked you up on LinkedIn before I came in, and you've been in the cybersecurity business for a long time.
Yeah, it's been about 20 years.
How have you seen it change?
Yeah, so I started in the forensics world, so doing disk level forensics. So back in the early 2000s, that meant when you had an investigation, that meant pulling a hard drive, creating a full disk image, and diving deep into the artifacts to figure out what happened on that device. And so from that point, 18 years ago, things have expanded tremendously, right? So now an investigation could be thousands of endpoints. It could be across a global enterprise. And so with the technology and with the adoption of things like cloud, the practice of doing investigations has expanded as well.
So have the kind of threats and the response to threats shifted over time? Now, you mentioned cloud, and about a week ago you published out your cloud threat report.
Right. We have. So cloud has been a huge area of focus, not just for Palo Alto Networks, but for Unit 42 as well. So as workloads move to the cloud, as organizations adopt and then refactor their applications and their systems for the cloud, it's creating a new attack surface, a really dynamic attack surface that organizations are exposing information, exposing their systems because of the power of the applications and the power of the cloud, without really sort of fully understanding what they need to do to keep it secure.
And we have different tools and techniques for protecting cloud workloads than we would for on-prem. I mean, don't they both have firewalls?
They do, but yes, there are firewalls for the cloud, there are firewalls for on-prem, but they're different. And there's a different set of configurations, native, cloud native, third-party applications. There's variations with the different CSPs, whether you're Amazon or Azure or GCP. And so there's a lot of complexity that's being introduced, but there's this incredible power and opportunity for companies to move very quickly to drive better business outcomes. So there's a huge incentive to move to the cloud, huge power in what can be accomplished, but keeping it all safe is another challenge.
So, just skip the page. So one of the things that the threat report highlighted was vulnerabilities around open source.
Yeah.
Open source now is in nearly every application stack. There's a statistic in there that I wrote it down. 51% of code bases in production depend on more than 100 open source packages.
Yes.
And we hear a lot about securing the software supply chain.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? What are the dangers?
Yeah, so open source is this double-edged sword. It's this incredible repository that speeds development. Certain problems, logic has been solved. Developers are, they're under the pressure to meet deadlines just like the rest of us, so they can go out and grab something. But you don't know whether or not that's secure or what vulnerabilities it has. And some of them are maintained and have a very active community of people patching, looking for, and updating. Others are just sort of collecting dust on the shelf and have vulnerabilities. The other point that makes it even more complicated is that the open source packages themselves have other dependencies. So there are these deep dependency chains.
Cascading.
And so, right, when you're bringing something in, even if that package doesn't have a problem, something else down the line might. And so as a result, you're building and you're compiling software that comes with a vulnerability in it, and then when you put it into production, it's sort of scaled out even in your application or as you're shipping it to your customers from one to many.
So that model's not going to change though, right? So how, as an IT guy, do I protect myself?
Yeah, what we say at Palo Alto Networks and then Unit 42 is really shift left.
Yeah.
And that means in the software development lifecycle, taking steps as early as you can in the development cycle to evaluate, protect, and understand what the code is that you're putting into your applications. That's the best way to do it.
So we're at RSA conference, and there I don't know how many hundreds of vendors across the street that are selling solutions to protect me, but yet they still call Unit 42.
Yeah.
How often is your team called in to resolve incidents that never should have happened? I mean, isn't a lot of what we're talking about just common sense?
Yeah, so just in the aggregate, we do, give or take, around 1,000 incident response investigations a year.
Holy cow.
And these are situations, I know, if you're in the SOC, every SOC has incidents, right, that they deal with daily. If you're in a SOC, you have thousands of alerts, and you have some of those that you need to investigate. Those aren't the ones that we're called in for. We're called in when that incident escalates beyond the point that the company can handle, right? From a risk standpoint, business operations are down, maybe it's ransomware and things are locked up, maybe customer data is exposed.
Right.
And so that's when we're coming in to help organizations. And to your point, or your question, how many of those should not have happened? A lot of them go back to cybersecurity best practices, whether it's vulnerability management, making sure things are patched, whether it's having defense in depth, so even if a user is phished, how can you prevent sort of privilege escalation or other things that lead to that severe incident? When we see really bad incidents, an enterprise-wide ransomware attack, usually it's a chain of things that have gone wrong. It's a lot of little things add up to create a catastrophic event.
Well, what stood out for me when I read the Cloud Threat Report, and I didn't write those statistics down, I wish I would have, are the number of organizations that aren't using MFA, multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
The number of S3 object stores that contain sensitive data. It just goes on and on.
Yeah. So I think the stats with MFA were shocking to me as well. So we did research, looked at over 200,000 different accounts, over 1,000 customers. So a big corpus of data, and in that, I think I'll have to look to see what the stat is, but I think it was very shockingly high percentage didn't have MFA protecting the console, and the console being the sort of control plane for, let's say it's AWS, that you can control spin up and down instances, control access to the S3 buckets. And so not having MFA in there is just an incredibly dangerous way to operate, because one phish of credentials, one stolen password from a different breach, and they can access the entire cloud account.
And the bad guys are getting innovative in how they breach. Even if you have MFA, I was reading, I don't know if it was in the Cloud Report or somewhere else, around SIM hijacking. Right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? What is
Sure.
that, and how worried should I be?
So if you think about your phone is really the Rosetta Stone, the key to your digital life.
Yes.
If I have your phone, I can get into your bank.
Right.
If you've got cryptocurrency, I can get into your Bitcoin. I have all your contacts. I mean, everything is there in our phone. And so a lot of it is protected simply by having that SIM. And so if I have your SIM, I have access to all that information. And so that's an incredibly, that's a great target for the bad guys, right? And so we are seeing a number of incidents that are targeting organizations and companies that are in the supply chain with the cellular providers to gain access ultimately to facilitate SIM swapping. So there's a huge ecosystem when it comes to the major carriers, and they use various outsourced business providers, and these companies are being targeted for organizations that are going after directly the SIMs.
Okay, this is an ignorant question for Steve. Are eSIMs more vulnerable than physical SIMs?
No, I think they're actually in many ways more secure because you can disable them in an easier fashion. So in that sense, I think it's a move in the right direction.
Let's step up a level. Who are the bad guys and what are they after? Is it all ransomware and I want to hijack and make some money?
Yeah, we think about it in a couple of different buckets, and it's oversimplified, but I think it's easier to conceptualize. You have e-crime groups, and so a lot of these are operating out of Eastern Europe and Russia, and I'd say major method there is ransomware, and really ransomware because if you think about having unauthorized access to an enterprise, there's really no better or easier way to monetize that unauthorized access than to lock things up and to extort. Right. That also includes business email compromise, where groups are inside of an organization, they find their way to the accounting department, and they essentially jump in the middle between a payment to perpetrate wire fraud. Right, so we see that all the time. So that's e-crime, financially motivated. I would put the SIM swapping in that category too. The second category is nation-state threats, and there the mission is more about gathering information, intellectual property, information on personnel or citizens. A lot of it is tied to military, industrial technology, and other, information gathering.
So I love that Palo Alto puts out the reports like the cloud threat report. A few months ago you did the ransomware and extortion report.
Yes.
And there was an interesting chart in there that kind of caught me by surprise. You broke out the number of ransomware attacks by industry.
Mm-hmm.
And you showed manufacturing, for example, was at the high end, whereas transportation's at the low end with almost 5x difference.
Mm-hmm.
What accounts for that?
Yeah, so when we look at the manufacturing industry, yes, that was the number one targeted industry in our data from the instance as well as from our research out there. And we believe that's because manufacturing, just generally speaking, is a bit of a laggard in adopting security controls and best practices. So they're just a little bit further back in the adoption curve on some of the things that help keep organizations safe, things like XDR technology, things like having next generation firewalls, and some of the just SOC best practices, the security operations teams. When you combine that with having a need for high availability of systems that you can't tolerate downtime, right? You create a high leverage event for the bad guys to extract payment. So they're a target because they can't be down, they're a target because they haven't adopted security best practices.
So your advice to manufacturing IT guy, security officer is what? Update your software practices?
Well, it's about building an information security program, right? And considering the threats that are specific to you. And I completely understand all organizations are dealing with scarcity when it comes to cybersecurity. Lack of people, lack of funds. You have to convince your executives that this is the right thing to invest in. But if you can be strategic about it, you can make decisions that are going to maximize the utility of what you invest in.
So looking still on ransomware and extortion, is there a difference between on-prem and cloud in terms of who's being attacked and how successfully?
Yeah, most ransomware still to this day does focus on on-prem, but once we're getting the extortion game in, and just to be clear, the extortion layers, traditional ransomware is locking up files. I think everyone is familiar with that now. What we're seeing is these layers of additional extortion tactics on top of it, or even in some cases instead. So things like accessing and stealing data, using that essentially to say, hey, I've got a terabyte of your information. We just had this in a matter where they stole over a terabyte and used that and say, hey, we're going to leak this information. There's customer information in there. And so most traditional encryption does focus on the enterprise, but when you get into the cloud, it's more about the data theft, and also we've seen some destruction. And so saying, hey, we've got access and we're gonna essentially destroy all of your virtual machines in the environment.
Okay. There's That covers storage as well as other things. Say different. So part of IB is storage. And if you talk to the storage guys, they'll say we have immutable snapshots, you have your data. But then you hear stories about the storage systems themselves being infiltrated and the immutable backups themselves are corrupt.
Right.
Do you see that?
We do. That is a deliberate tactic by the threat actors to identify, disable, corrupt, or otherwise make the backups unavailable. Now, organizations know this more and more, and we are seeing it get better, but that is an absolute area of focus for the threat actors before they lock everything up.
Sometimes, even if you're doing the right thing, you're still vulnerable.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the advice to network defenders, to IT teams, is to really take steps to make them immutable, to have them segmented off from the rest of your network. But we've seen matters where, even where there are backups, very few organizations go through the practice of doing a full enterprise-wide recovery. And so this one organization that we've been working with, even though they did have available backups, as they're going through that cost-benefit analysis and the amount of time it's going to take them to recover, they, from a business loss standpoint, they said, look, like paying this ransom, we're going to be up faster than the weeks or even months it would take us to get everything from backup, and we still might not have that sort of latest period of time that we need between when the encryption happened and when the last backup was.
So incident response is just a small part, I think, of what Palo Alto Networks does. Is there a feedback loop? Does your team talk to the product teams to make sure that Palo Alto's...
Yeah, to be clear, what we do in Unit 42 is a very small part of the universe that Palo Alto Networks covers, right? So Palo Alto Networks is the world's leading firewall provider. We have incredible cloud security technology. We have Cortex XDR, XIM, and sort of the operating system of the SOC. So there's a lot out there. But what we do in Unit 42 is we are users of the product stack and of the technology. And so there's this incredible feedback loop. So not only are we helping with the threat intelligence to make the products better from a detection and prevention standpoint, but if there are use cases, like when we do an incident response investigation and Cortex XDR doesn't meet our need, we're going to go to the product team and say, hey, like, we need it to give us this cloud telemetry in this use case where we drop in and we need to know something that happened before the tool was in place. How can we make that work? So that there's a lot of interaction with the product teams.
Good. So you're in the field. You're looking at attacks as they evolve. What do you see trending that maybe wasn't a year ago?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been really interesting is we think about attacks, yes, in terms of the outcome and the objective of the threat actor, stealing information, locking things up to make money, etc. But all of them, what's common is, so what happens on the kill chain, we call it. A MITRE attack is a very common framework, and we think about things in terms of the MITRE attack framework. And so even if you're not familiar with that, sort of some common sense stages, which is first, how did they get in? What's the intrusion vector? And that's a huge one, right? Because you want to stop them from getting in. But so one of the trends I think is really interesting is how the threat actors are getting in, and we're always keeping our eyes out for new tactics there in terms of the intrusion vector. And in the past, I'd say 3 to 6 months, we're seeing more and more tactics being successful at evading multi-factor. Oh. And that's sort of scary because for a long time, I think many orgs have seen MFA as sort of the silver bullet to stay safe. And there's two tactics. One is this MFA fatigue, which, we all have MFA on our phone, and if you're doing other things, it pops up and you just hit it and maybe you're not thinking about it. So threat actors know this and they're sort of bombing us with these requests. The other one is smishing, which is similar in that they're prompting an MFA request, but they're doing it by virtue of sending you a text message with some urgency. Hey, this is the help desk to close out this ticket. Here's a link. And that link in text is to their landing page. And their landing page looks like your company domain. And it's prompting for your creds and your MFA token, which they're then relaying on the back end to supply to the legit authentication site.
Clever. And you call that smishing? Like
Smishing, yeah,
smishing?
exactly. A smash up of those two words. And it's really hard for companies. We had one matter, we're helping an org respond, very sophisticated tech company, mature InfoSec program, mature SOC, and I think they had around 20,000 employees. And it took them close to a week to stop this because they knew it was happening. They called us in for help, and it was a matter of educating the users, because if you think about it, phones aren't controlled as tightly as assets behind the firewall, and so they can't stop a user from going to a particular domain on their personal device, and so they couldn't block it at the firewall. They were trying to educate their users, but the users were still clicking on these links, supplying their username, password, and MFA to it.
So it's a scary world. You have fun in your job, though. I mean, you look at bad things every day.
I think that cybersecurity is one of the most innovative industries in the world. We have to keep pace to be there for our customers, but there's a whole economy of people that are trying to outpace us, and so just the rapid evolution of protecting orgs and the threat actors evolving themselves and their tactics and capabilities to stay a step ahead. Sure. We will be busy for a long time.
All right, I'll let you get back to it. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for taking the time today.
My pleasure.
Yes.
Thanks.